Hello and welcome. I'm Adam with Push the Envelope, the channel that gives you everything artificial intelligence and machine learning. Today we are continuing on with the Python Bootcamp and we are looking at inputs and outputs. Now, inputs and outputs in this case has a couple meanings. So we're going to be looking at how do we get inputs from the user, whether that's through the command line or whatever interpreter that you're using, but also how do we read in files and write values to files as well. So let's jump over to the Jupyter Notebook and I'll show you how to do both of these. Okay, Jupyter is up and we are ready to go. If you haven't been following along, the top link here is the link to the GitHub page that has all of these documents. So it has the templates along with the solutions, and in this case, it's going to have all of our input files that we're going to be reading. Now, you don't necessarily need to go download all of the documents from the GitHub. You can create them yourself if you want to. It's just going to be a little more work on your part. So I'll let you decide what you want to do, and we will continue to move on. So for this tutorial, we're going to be looking at how do we get inputs from the user, how do we get inputs from files, and then how do we actually write things to files, followed by just some practice problems to really put it all together and get some practice under our belts. So let's start with how do we get user inputs. And by user inputs, we're really looking for how do we get inputs from the user on the command line. So how do we get the user, how do we prompt the user for values and have them give them to us to store? So I can say I want to grab the user's name. So I'm going to have a name here. I'm going to use the built-in function called input. And input is going to be followed by an open and closed parenthesis. Now all input means is I'm going to be looking for some input for the user to type in. Now what goes in the parenthesis is what you're prompting the user for. So just some sort of quick text prompt that says what the user should be adding. So in this case, I'm going to say, what is your name? And that will let the user know what they should be adding into the input box. So if I run this cell, you can see it pops up with what is your name, and it's going to ask me to put in my name. So let's say my name is Tom, and I hit enter, and now Tom is being stored as name. So if I say print your name is followed by name, and I go ahead and run this again, and I say my name is Tom again. Now I can see that Tom is being stored as name, and I can immediately print that back out to the screen or use it for whatever I need to. Alternatively, I could also say, hey, I want to also know your age. So right after name, I'm going to say age is equal to input your age in years. Single. Okay, so now I can say your name is name and you are age years old. Let's run this to see what happens. So looking for my name, I'm going to say my name is Tom again. Looking for my age, let's say I'm 32. Your name is Tom and you are 32 years old. Okay, so you can see both of these are saved as variables, and we can use those variables for whatever we want. In this case, just printing to the screen. But we could use those for requesting a number from the user and adding or multiplying to some other number or whatever it may be. So kind of continuing on with what we've been doing all up until this point, there's a lot of practice problems I've been using that we've been using throughout every single tutorial and kind of just building upon that. And this is going to be one of them. So the gratuity calculator. So I want you to try to create a calculator that asks the user for the total bill that they have to pay and how much they want to tip. And then I want you to print to the screen how much they should be tipping. So you're going to be asking the user for the total bill amount and the tip percentage, in return how much they should be tipping. Okay. So go ahead and do that. Now, one thing that you'll need to keep in mind is whenever you're asking the user for an input and they put something in, even if it's a number, it is always going to be returned as a string. Okay, so if you want to do any sort of math with the variables, you need to convert it into a number in order for it to work. So with that, take a second, try to see if you're able to build this in a few lines, and then come back and we will work through it. Okay, so let's go ahead and say my bill or their bill, is going to be equal to bill, and it's going to be equal to the input function. What is your total bill? Okay, that will give us the bill. And then I want to say tip percent equals input. How much do you want to tip? Okay, so I'm going to change this to percent. So tip percent and bill. If I go ahead and all I'm going to do is print the bill and the tip percent, but I want to run this to see that it works. So I'm going to say $45.67. Okay, and my tip percent, let's say I want to tip 18%. Okay, you can see both of those. But what I really want to say is, all right, what's the type of bill and the type of tip percent? Because I want to show that if I put some random values in here, let's say 18% again. See, both of these are strings. So now the next step, after we get the input from the user, is we really need to convert those. So I can say bill is equal to a floating point of bill. This is going to convert the bill into a floating point or a decimal. And then for tip percent, I could also do it into a float. But what I'm going to say is an integer. So it's going to convert it to an integer. And since I'm asking for the percent, I really need to divide it by 100 in order to get me the actual floating point decimal that I need to multiply the bill by. So now if I run this, what's total bill, put something in there, let's say 18% again. Okay, this last one I spelled percent wrong, so let's try this again. Okay, as you can see, both of those are floats. So now we can really say tip underscore amount is equal to the bill times the tip percent. Now all I want to do is print tip amount to the screen. So $44.77 with an 18% tip will give us $8.06. You can also round this if you would like using the built-in round function that we've been using up until this point with a 2 decimal precision. Okay, so again, a little more dynamic for our gratuity calculator, but you can see ways of getting values from the user and then converting those into useful numbers. All right, that will be all I cover for getting inputs from the command line. Now let's start looking at how do we read files. Okay, so I have some files in the background like I was talking about. In this case, I have list of names. So if I open list of names, you can see I have all these names. It has the last name, comma, the first name. If you want to copy this into your own text file, go ahead. But I will continue on, assuming you already have it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to call our file, just file. And that's going to be equal to the built-in function called open. This is how you open files. And now it's looking for the file location. So in this case, I have the file stored in a folder called files. In order to get to the file name, you have to do a slash. So every time you want to go within another folder, so I want to go within the files folder, so files slash will go in the files folder. Now I'm looking for the name of the file. In this case, it is called list of names.txt for a text file. Okay, so this will open the file for us. Now we need to read the contents of the file. So I'm going to have lines is equal to file.read. File.read is going to read the entire file. And then we're going to say file.close. This is going to close the file so that everything is not open in the background and we already have the content. So if I just print lines, okay, you can see here's all of the contents of the folder. Now, this is hard to tell, but it's actually all one line. the thing is, when you're using Jupyter Notebook or Jupyter Lab, whenever there's a end character, it's going to automatically print the end. So in order to see any hidden special characters, you can use another function called repr. And this is going to print the line. So if you print repr with the lines, it's going to print the line in all hidden characters so you can see what it actually looks like. Now when we print it, you can see all of these have a /n, and the /n is just a line return. But this is all really one line when you read it using the read function. So this is all one string that we're reading in. That is not necessarily ideal, especially when you want to read the file a line at a time and you want to do something with each of those lines. So let's look at how do you read one of the lines. Same thing if you do file equals open, the open function. It's in the files folder, and the name is list of names.txt. So we're opening the names, list of names file. Now I'm going to say a line is equal to file.readLine followed by file.close. Now when I print line, you can see we've only grabbed the first line within the file. Again, this isn't printing special characters, so if I do repr, you can see that this is the actual string right here with the special character for the end character at the end of the line. But we were able to read one line within the file, which is what we were shooting for. Unfortunately, we only read the first line, so we really need to figure out how do we read line by lines, or read all of the lines and store them as maybe a array or a list. So again, file equals open. We are reading from the files folder. We are reading list of names.txt. Okay. Now we're going to read lines, but we're going to say file.read lines plural. So instead of read line like we had before, where it's just going to read one line, we're going to read all the lines. And what this is going to do is it's going to store it in a list so that we can use it in the future. We're going to say file.close. And when you print lines, you can see that each line is stored within the list, and each value within the list is the full line, including the end character. And it's going to be important for the future when we go to actually use these values. So we'll get to that. But at least now each line is read separately into a list, and we can use it from there. And that's how we're going to be doing it in the future. Now I'm going to show you the way that most people read files, and this is the standard way, I would say, of reading all of the lines within a file. So I would say with open files, so that's our folder, list of names.txt. So the with is going to open the file. So with the opened file as f. So we're opening the file and we're storing it as f. That's what this first line means. I'm going to do a for loop. So for line in f, which is the name of our file. So f.read lines. So now we're going one by one, and I'm going to print the line. As you can see, it prints all of these out. And if I use the repr again, you can see that it prints the end character as well. But it's going one by one. So now we can do things within this. So this is the standard way of reading a file line by line and then doing something with it. So everything in this for loop would be doing something with it. So let's look at how do we get rid of those end characters so that we only have the contents of the string. Okay, so sort of along the same line. So same way of opening it. So with whatever your folder name is, whatever your file name is, as f. So open the file as f for each of the lines. So for line in f.read lines. Now we need to do something. So I'm going to say make a new variable called new line. So new line is going to be equal to the line that we're on. So remember, in this for loop, every time we go through it, it's stored as line. So there's a bunch of built-in string functions. One of them is called replace. So dot replace. Now I want to replace that end character, so \n. I want to replace that character with nothing. So replacing it with nothing means removing it from the list, removing it from the string. There are other special characters, so if I do another dot replace after this, I could also do /t. /t will be tab. There isn't any tabs within this folder, but there could be in future ones as well. And any other characters that you want to remove, you can use this replace function with. If I wanted to replace the final one with a space, I could do that as well, but in this case, I just want to remove it, so replace it with an empty string. Now if I print the new line, you can see all the values, and if I use the function to see hidden characters, you can see now these lines do not have any more hidden characters. So we're getting there. We replaced the special characters, but now you're going to find that maybe I want to grab the last names and the first names individually. And I want to maybe reorder them to be first name space last name or something along the lines of that. So now we're going to be looking at how do we split the strings. Okay, so I'm actually going to copy everything I did here and move it down because we're going to continue on with what we did. So if I rerun this, you can see, so I have the name. It is last name, comma, space, first name. So one of the functions that you can use, in this case, all of our variables that we want are spaced apart with a comma and a space. So if I split the line, so now if I say new line is equal to new line dot split, and I'm going to split on the comma, but if I split on the comma, it's going to continue to keep the space for the second half. So if I split on the comma space, it's going to split the two words and remove the comma space. All right, let's see what this looks like. So if I print new line, you can see now each line is creating a new array, new list. And the first part of the list is the last name, and the second part of the list is the first name. If I didn't want to store the values within a list, I could say last comma first, and it's going to store the last name in the last variable and store the first name in the first variable. So now if I print first, last, you can see now our names are in order of first, last, and actually printed correctly. So just more ways of manipulating the strings in order to get you the variables that you want. So let's continue on with that. Let's do something similar to what I just did, except for I want you to store all of the first names within a list and all of the second or the last names within the second list. So see if you can do that. Remember, the list functions have an append. All the lists have an append function, and the append function allows you to add values to a list. So use that. Use what you learned in the for loop and in the variable tutorials in order to see if you can save all of the first and last names into two separate lists. Okay, let's go ahead and work through this. So I'm going to create an empty list called firsts, and I'm going to create an empty list called lasts. And these are just going to, as I work through the file, those are what is going to, those are where I'm going to store the first and the last names. So using the standard practice of with open files / whatever your file name is. Oops. List of file, sorry, not files, names.txt as f for each line. So for line in f.read lines. Okay, so for each line, we are going to say that the line is equal to the line dot replace. We're going to replace special characters, so this is the end character. And I know I don't have tabs, but I could add tabs if I wanted to replace that as nothing. I'm going to continue with grabbing the last and first names like we did in the last example. So this would be list.split, line.split. And we're going to be splitting on the comma space. Again, if you only split on the comma, the space is going to be saved as part of the second variable. So just be aware of that. And I'm going to say first.append. Remember, the append function will add new values into the list. And since the first at the very beginning is blank, it's just going to add all of the first values to the first list. And we're going to do the same thing for last. So last.append last. Okay, so now at the very end of this, I can print firsts and I can print last to see all the values that were saved. As you can see, here's all the first names and here's all of the last names. Okay, so let's expand upon that a little bit. So maybe now, kind of like we did in this previous exercise, but now I want you, instead of saving the first names and the last names as separate lists, I want you to create a new list of the full names. So first name, space, last name. Can you store all of those combinations as one list? See what you can do. And we will move on with that. Now, I am asking you, just remember this, I am asking you to read from list of names 2. So let's look at what list of names 2 looks like. Sort of the same thing. It's got the last name and then a slash and then the first name. So slightly different than the file we were reading in before. So take a look at this. If you haven't downloaded the text files, go ahead and download this or just copy this into a new text file so that you can read it in. But see what you can do. See if you can say, for instance, the first name is Paul space Lewis and store that into a new list. All right. In order to do this, I'm actually going to copy everything I did before for reading each of the lines and then replacing the end character. So I'm going to copy that down here just so we don't have to keep typing it out. I'm going to define a new list called full names. Remember, we're reading in list of names 2. That's going to be a totally different text file. Now let's go back and look at that list. So all of my last and first names are separated by a slash. So when we go to do our line equals line dot split, we are no longer splitting on a comma because the comma is not in the line. We're splitting on this slash character. Okay. When we split that, it's going to store the last name and the first name. So we can store those as 2 separate variables here. Now I want to say full names dot append the first name plus a space plus the last name. And finally, printing all of these out, you can see that each name was stored in the list as first space last for the entire file. I'm hoping this makes sense. I know it's moving very quickly through this, but again, lots of practice will get you to the point of being able to do this fairly quickly. Okay, so that is, for now, what we're going to cover for reading files, but let's start looking at how do we write to files. Okay, so coming down here, we're going to do sort of the same thing, but what we're going to say is file equals open files / practice write .txt. Now, practice write does not exist yet. We are going to create this file in order to write values into it. Now, if we want to write values into something, into this file, we need to say open whatever the file name is and wherever it's located. We need to create use a comma, and we need to pass in the W character. W is going to say we're opening this file in order to write to it. Now I can say file.write. I'm just going to write hello world. And then I need to close the file. Okay, let's run this. Now, nothing is going to pop up because we're writing to the file and we're not printing to the screen. So we can open our practice write. If I can figure out where I put it. Files, and there we go, practice write. So you can see hello world was written to the file. You can also write multiple lines to the file. So like we had before, I'm going to switch from this way of opening the file and writing to it to the standard with open. So with open, whatever the file's name is, so files/practice write.txt. Remember to pass in that W to say we want to write to this file. We're calling the file F. So with open the file as F. For name in names, we are going to do f.write name. Now, this is important. If you remember when we were reading in the file, you could see all of the special characters for where the line ended, and that gave us new lines for each value. So it's when you go to write to the file, you want to make sure to add that special character in. So every time you write a line within the file, you need to end it with \n in order to write a new line. Now, this for loop in the middle, we're going to be looping through some names. So we need to pass it some names to begin with. So I'm going to say names is equal to, say, Paul, Louisa, Tyson, Mike. Yeah, we can end it there. All right, so we have this list of names now. We're going to write these one by one to the file. And so, again, whenever you're writing to the file and you want multiple lines, you need to make sure you end your line with a /n in order to tell it to write to the next line. If I run this, and I open the file, let me make sure that it's actually working here. I think I need to close this file. Okay, you can see if I move my screen again, you can see that we have all of our names written to the list. This was actually the wrong file here, sorry. There we go. You can see that we have all of our names written to the list. There we go. So we have Paul, Louisa, Tyson, and Mike. Those are the 4 names we had in our list. I'm going to show you what happens if you don't have this /n. So if I run this again, and I open up the file, you can see all of them are written as one line. So it's really important to make sure you add that /n character in order to restore that file. Okay. All right, with that taken care of, let's go ahead and move into yet another exercise. So same thing, read from list of names. So list of names, again here, where you had the last name, comma, space, first name. Read from that list, and I want you to write them to a new file in the proper order. So first, space, last. See what you can do there, and then we come back and we will work through this one together. Okay, again, I'm going to use the standard way of doing this. So with open, every time you go to open a file, just think with open, with open. So I'm going to, with open files, I want to read from the file first. So list of names.txt. This is going to be the file I'm reading from. So these are going to be all the names within the existing file. So list of names. I don't need to pass in the W character because I'm not writing to this one. I'm going to be storing this one as F, so I'm going to be calling this one F. I'm going to do yet another with function, so with open, I'm going to open another file. In this file, I'm going to, again, call practice write.txt. Now, this is the file I'm going to be writing to, so you need to make sure to pass the W character in there to write to this one. Now I'm going to need a different name for it, so I'm going to call this one W. So our F is going to be the one we're reading from, our W is going to be the one we're writing to. If you remember from reading the files, it's for a line in f.readLines. This is going to go one by one through the file. Let me just remind you what this looks like. So if I print the line out using the REPR, you can see here's what each of these lines look like. Now I'm going to say line equals line dot replace. We're going to get rid of that special character. We're going to replace it with nothing. Again, if I run this, okay, our lines are getting better. No more special character. Now we need to split. So we have our last name and we have our first name, which is equal to line dot split. What character are we splitting on? Well, we are splitting on the comma and the space. Splitting on that will give us our last and first. So now if I print last first, you can see here's the name. We need to now create a new variable, let's say. So name is equal to first plus a space plus the last. I can print that to the screen as well to see, okay, now it's in the proper order. Last thing we need to do is just write this to the file. So W, remember W is the name of the file that we're opening to write to. W.write. We're going to be writing name to the file. Now remember, if I do it like this, it's going to store it all as one line. I need to add the \n character in order to add a new line every single time I write to the file. I'm going to remove the name. Okay, now let's run. Let me open the file, and you can see, here we go. First name, space, last name, all the way down the list. Okay, I'm hoping that was fairly straightforward. Let's, again, do another practice problem. So what we're looking at here is I have a whole bunch of stock data in the background. And so the file is called stock market. Here's what it looks like. It's the name of the stock that we had, followed by a separator, followed by whatever the price of the stock is, however much it changed. So for instance, Microsoft, which is this one, was positive $3.56 today. So what are we doing? Well, I want you to read all of the stock names and the dollar amounts from the stockmarket.txt file. And then for each file, you're going to ask the user how many shares they own, multiply the number of shares by the change in price to figure out the total amount that was changed. And then I want you to write the stock name, the number of shares, and the amount gained or lost to a new file called my account. Okay. And then you're going to write the total number of shares owned of all stocks, or just print out the total number of shares of all stocks in the final account, win or loss for the day. So let's work through this one by one. Step one, we're going to read the file. So we're going to be reading with the standard way of doing it, which is with opening the file. It's in files /stock_market.txt. This is the file we're going to be reading from. So as F, I'm going to say for line in f.readLines. All I'm going to do right now is print the line, just so we can see what each one of these look like. Okay. As always, first thing we need to do, replace special characters. So line.replace \n with nothing. Okay. Now we need to separate the two values. So that is a slash, a vertical line, and then another slash. So in this case, the left half is going to be the stock. The right half is going to be the gain. And so we're going to say line dot split space the vertical line followed by another space. This is going to remove everything in the middle and leave us with the left half and the right half. So let me print stock gain. Now, this is fine. The only thing we need to change is if I print the type of gain, it's going to tell me that it is a string and we need it to be a number. So we need to say gain is equal to floating point of gain. Now if I print gain to the screen, it's going to look the same, but if I print the type, it's going to be much different. It's now going to be a floating point and we can actually do math on it. Okay, so we have our stock and we have the amount that it changed. What we need to do now is we need to ask the user how much of whatever stock they have do they own. So whatever stock we're on right now, so let's say Apple is the very first one. How many shares of Apple do you own? So to do that, we're going to use the built-in input function. So we're going to say the number of shares is equal to input. We're going to say how many plus whatever our stock is plus shares do you own. All right, let's look at what this is doing. So it says how many, whatever stock we're on right now. So very first case, we're going to print how many Apple shares do you own. The user is going to give us a value and we're going to store it as shares. Now again, getting inputs from the user is going to store it as a string. So we need to say shares is equal to an integer of shares. I'm going to print shares and we're going to just run through this to say, okay, how many shares of Apple do you own? Let's say I own 2. And it's going to print that out to the screen. How many shares of Tesla? How many shares of Microsoft? Adobe? AMC? And Google? Oh, and Meta. Okay, so you can see that's how we're going to work through it. Okay. We need to know the total amount of change. Now, the total amount of change is going to be equal to whatever the change was, so this gain right here, times the amount of shares that the person owned. So if it went up $3.50, but you had 4 shares, it's $3.50 times each one of your shares. And so I'm going to call this total gain is equal to the number of shares times the gain for that stock. Okay, so now if I print that out to the screen, I'm going to be printing the stock followed by the total gain. I'm just going to quickly run through each one of these, and I accidentally switched this to Markdown language. Stand by for 1 second. I need to restart. There we go. All right. So how many shares of Apple do you own? 1. How many shares of Tesla, Microsoft, Adobe? I'm just going to fill these out very quickly. But as you can see, for each one of these, you can see what the stock name was, what the total gain was based on how many stocks you own of that particular one. Okay. So that is going to take care of steps 1, steps 2, steps 3. So now what we need to do is step 4. How do I write the stock name and the number of shares and the amount gained or lost separated by a comma to a new file? If you remember from before, if you follow this with open, I'm going to use with open files / I'm going to save this as my account.txt. I am using this as a writing file, so I need to pass the W character into the open. and I need to save it as a new name. So I'm going to save it as W, and I'm going to make sure that I indent everything else below it over to line up with this with statement. All right, so now instead of printing all of this to the screen, what I'm going to do is I am going to write it to the file. So w.write, printing my stock, plus separating by a comma, plus your number of shares. Now your number of shares is going to be a number. In order to write it to a file, it needs to be a string. So you need to turn it into a string. Okay, so stock, comma, space, shares, plus, comma, space. The last thing I needed was the total amount gained. So plus string again, because total gain is a floating point. So total gain. All of that is going to be written to the file. Again, very important, the last thing you add to this is your end character, or else you're going to only write one line per each time you go through this. Okay, let's run this. I have a extra comma here that I shouldn't, so make sure you don't follow that. Okay, but now you can see we're going to go through these again. So maybe I own 2 Apple, 3 Tesla, 5 Microsoft, 1 Adobe, 3 AMC, and 6 Google, and 7 Meta. Okay, just adding random values for now. All of that should be written to this file right here called my account, and it is. So it's the name of the stock, the number of shares that the person owns, and the total amount changed for that day. Okay, that takes care of step 4. The final thing we're looking for is what's the total number of shares owned and what's the final account total. So adding all of the shares, number of shares together, adding all of the total gains together, and then storing that as a final count. So before I even open the file, I'm going to just make a new variable called total shares. And I'm going to make another one called total balance. And I'm going to set both of these to 0. And every time we go through, we're just going to increment those with the new values. So somewhere in here, let's go right after total gain is calculated. We're going to say total shares plus equals the new amount of shares. Same thing for total balance. Plus equals the total gain. Now, since it's starting at 0, every time it goes through, it's just going to keep incrementing by the new value and giving us a running total throughout the entire thing. Now, at the very end, I can just print out total shares and total balance to the screen. When I run this, I'm going to have to give it values again. I'm going to randomly assign that, but you can see the total number of shares we own, which is all of these added together, is 25, and our total account balance, which was calculated by taking the number of shares by the gain for the day of that stock, is equal to negative $286. So we lost $286 today. All right, I know this was a lot. This was definitely a quick tutorial into reading files and writing to files. There are definitely packages out there that will help you do this a lot faster. For instance, we're going to go over Pandas, which is a way of reading CSV files or Excel files super quickly, so you don't have to worry about splitting and changing special characters and all that. There are definitely other files as well that will help you write, but this is just kind of giving you the basics of if you wanted to do it yourself, here's how you actually would open the file and write to files along with getting inputs from the user. So I'm going to stop here. Stay tuned for the next set of videos. We're going to be looking at, now that we've come to, this is one of the final tutorials, how can we put it all together into some sort of capstone project to put all of the skills that we just learned together and solve real world problems. So stay tuned for that next video, and I will see you next time.